And so there's actually this specific sequence that I walk people through that I've learned that we have to, many people want the joy, many people want, the happiness. Then it's like, well, I understand that. And there's actually work that we have to do to lay the foundation, because we can't just jump to joy. What happens is that it further disconnects our mind from our body, because our mind tells us, oh, just go to gratitude, be joyful, be happy. And the body is saying, that's fine for you, but I'm carrying burdens. I don't have the energy for that. I can't go there. And so we have to lay the foundation, and I walk them through creating a felt sense of safety first by working with their nervous system, then a felt sense of support, and then we can go into the growth and the expansion and the joy and have it be safe and not actually make their physical health symptoms worse, because that's what I did. I actually tried to go to joy, because that's what they tell us to do, especially all the mindset type of things. It's like, oh, just change your mindset, change your thoughts. And I did that, and I was making my health conditions worse, and I didn't understand it until I came back to this idea of, oh, it's because the nervous system isn't there yet. I've got work to do first.
So give us an example of how the tool that you use to be in touch with the nervous system and calm it down.
Yeah, this is really simple and powerful things. And so this comes out of my training with Somatic Experiencing and also NeuroAffective Touch. And then I also integrate internal family systems with the somatic work to kind of take it to the next level after that. So when we're working with the nervous system, we get to understand how do we track it? How do we know which state it is in? And so that's the first thing that I teach, and having people be able to recognize when they're in sympathetic. So what's your heart rate? What's your breath like? What are the sensations in your body? There's a lot of stuff that gets stored in our gut, right? Because of that vagus nerve, and that's where things get stuck, especially in that freeze response. And so what's going on in your stomach? Do you have knots in your stomach? Do you have pain in your stomach? These are all signs that we can work directly with the nervous system. And I work less with the brain and the central nervous system, and I'm working more with the autonomic nervous system, because that's where the stored trauma is. And it's a bottom-up approach. And so when we work with the autonomic nervous system, start to free it up and bring some flexibility and some health to it, then I find it naturally changing our thoughts rather than trying to change our thoughts first and have that impact our biology and the autonomic nervous system. And so with the autonomic nervous system, what I do, which is probably different than a lot of people do, is I actually use breath as a marker for what's happening in the nervous system, rather than trying to control my breath and that way influence my nervous system. And so there is one exercise where I'm working with expansion in the breath, but otherwise I'm actually teaching people to watch for that spontaneous deep breath that happens after we do an exercise. And there are specific movements, and movements become really important with the nervous system, because that's how we actually can work directly with the nervous system. Our nerves, of course, move our muscles. And so just with some simple movements, we can then start to see what effect that has on our nervous system, and be able to track that through the deep spontaneous breaths, or yawns, or a sense of softening in the belly, a sense of openness in the chest. There's all these ways that we can measure in the moment what's happening in the nervous system by the different exercises or things that we are doing to provide a sense of safety or provide a sense of support.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I love what you say, because we try to force our brain, joy, 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 gratitude, all of those things with that mindfulness that's so popular now. But if it's not changing our physiology, we're still going to be like deer in headlights.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And to emphasize the importance of what you just said, it's, I think, helpful for people to remember that these are patterns that formed in our nervous system before we had words.
Wow.
And so much of this comes back to our neurodevelopment, even things that happened in utero, things that happened during birth, things that influence the formation of our nervous system. And then add on to that the attachment piece and that connection or lack of enough connection that we needed. And these are all things that were pre-verbal. And so many times it really is just a felt sense in our body, but we don't have words for it. And so what we've tried to do, right, as human beings is like, oh, well, we have a brain now. We have a brain that is very logical. We didn't have that logical brain when our first patterns were developing in our nervous system. And so somehow we think, though, that we can just change our thoughts and use that logical part of our brain to change these patterns that were wired in before there were even words. And it's just not consistent with science and consistent with how our body was even formed.
That's so fascinating, because many times when we work with women who are recently diagnosed, or, I've been on the journey for a while, and we get into essential number 4, which is, my healing the emotional wounds. They, oh, I had a perfectly normal childhood. I don't have any emotional stuff. But then we always, do the work and help them to realize that, from the time you were conceived until the age of 5, all those subconscious patterns were being established, and you may be reacting versus responding to situations. And so, yeah, it's very, very interesting. So women that are diagnosed with breast cancer, for so many of them, it's such a trauma, because, first thing they think of is, bald head and sick, and, what if I die? So it's can be very traumatic. So what words of wisdom would you have to, women who've been diagnosed with breast cancer, and how to, release that trauma and to let that go?
Mm-hmm. This is huge, Dr. V. This is huge. And there's a number of things that I think are really important for those specifically who have been diagnosed with breast cancer. And I also want to say this with a lot of gentleness and grace and love. And a lot of this is that a lot of breast cancer specifically is around increased oxidative stress and epigenetics. And trauma, both generational trauma, but then personal trauma, is directly linked to oxidative stress and epigenetic triggers. And we know that there's this threshold of oxidative stress that we can have around our DNA. And once it crosses that line, then it's an epigenetic switch that happens, and we start getting diseases. And being able to recognize that, hey, a lot of this could be driven by that oxidative stress, and what are the things that increase that oxidative stress can help improve my health, not only with my current diagnosis, but then let me think about the rest of my life, and how can I set myself up for success and for my best health moving forward. And there's oxidative stress is at the heart of what I talk about in the biology of trauma, because oxidative stress is a huge downstream effect of stored trauma, and one of those things that will prevent us from being able to really work with the nervous system and get it to shift to parasympathetic. And oxidative stress, especially inside the cells, it will keep our cells in survival mode. It will keep our cells in danger mode. And so this is one of those circumstances where, you can go see a therapist and talk about stuff as much as you want, and it's not going to change the amount of oxidative stress that has accumulated in your cells. So this is why I find it so important to bring in this piece around the biology of trauma, because it's not going to be enough to just go see a therapist to address some of the emotional component of breast cancer. We really need to look at how it has affected your biology, and even some of the biology that would have predisposed you to having an experience of trauma, and it not just being a stress, and it drove your oxidative stress levels even higher. So that would be one piece is, yes, the emotional trauma component is very important to address, but let's make sure that we're addressing it in the right way that is actually going to be helpful. And that way is not just talking about it. we've just, both said how how there's limitations with that, right? And this is just the next level to understanding the limitation of that approach and having that be your only approach. So that would be one thing. And then in regards to the childhood stuff, I am one of those, right? Never would have looked at my childhood and said, oh, I was abused, I was neglected. So saying that, let's remember that there are many ways in which we can have gaps in our neurodevelopment coming out of childhood. And it's not just our relationship with our caregivers or our family. It's actually all these other things as well. All of the different exposures that we might have had to things that were neurotoxins. And there's a long list of them. And so it is not just saying, oh, whether you were neglected or abused or had trauma, it's all of these other things that influence the neurodevelopment that would have created this general felt sense of safety or this general felt of unsafe and insecurity. And Dr. V, you mentioned the frequent common thoughts that happen right when someone gets that diagnosis, and everything that you listed there, everything that you listed is a sign of stored trauma in the body, is a sign that a person has those patterns of insecurity and survival wired into their nervous system that would have contributed to their disease process, and how awesome it would be to be able to address those in order to help the healing journey, not only with the trauma, but with our physical health. Because when we do this work with our nervous system, we will achieve our best health, whatever our own best health is. And so whether or not a person recognizes that they had trauma in their childhood, if that was their reaction to the diagnosis, with lots of love and grace and gentleness, let me just point out that that is a clear sign that they have trauma patterns wired into their nervous system. And we have some amazing work that we can do that will so benefit their life present day and for their health to come.